She was a leader, destined for significance. But in the early hours of March 5, 2008, Eve Marie Carson walked from her home toward what should have been a new dawn, a morning full of promise and purpose. Instead, that path ended in terror. She had called the world to service. Her classmates, faculty, friends. She believed in justice, in compassion, in a life defined not by what she took but what she gave. Yet one night, strangers seized her hopes, robbed her of safety, and then of life. What followed was a tangled mystery. Cell phone towers, ATM cameras, conflicting testimonies, and a desperate plea in her last moments, one that embodied courage rather than fear. They say she asked for prayer. They say she begged for her life. Tonight, you'll hear her story, the childhood that shaped her, the dreams she nurtured, the last ordinary day before everything changed. You'll journey through broken phone records, chilling witness accounts, and the painstaking steps investigators took to uncover an unthinkable betrayal. Eve Carson's murder stunned her university, shattered her family, and left a community asking why someone so full of promise, so love-filled, would become the target of such violence. But in the darkest hours, truth has a way of flickering into view. Join me as we reconstruct what happened in those fateful hours, how hope turned to horror, and how Eve's legacy would become more than a tragic headline. Eve Marie Carson was born on November 19, 1985, in Athens, Georgia. From an early age, she showed a rare combination of intellect, kindness, and leadership. In high school, she was class valedictorian, president of the student body, and deeply involved in academic teams and service. Teachers remember her as bright but unpretentious, always with a book in her hand, always reaching out. When she came to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, her reach extended further. She majored in political science and biology, earned membership in Phi Beta Kappa, and was selected as a Moorhead Kane Scholar. Her ambition was anchored not in prestige, but in purpose. She volunteered with programs for underserved youth, worked in labs, and studied abroad. First Havana, then in Egypt, seeking to bridge divides between theory and human need. Her peers saw someone driven by curiosity and compassion. Outside academics, Eve was vibrant, talented in speech and debate, deeply engaged in student government, a friend who listened, who laughed, who believed ideas could change the world. She planned for graduate school, perhaps law or public health, always keeping service at the center. She had a warmth that made others feel seen, and she pushed her community toward better. But amidst achievements, there were vulnerabilities. Though confident, Eve also carried concerns about fairness, about justice, about her own safety. She recognized the fragility in the world. She worried about the world beyond Chapel Hill. Yet her fears did not dampen her resolve. She refused to hide. Instead, she stepped forward. Her family remembered her not just for what she did, but how she did it. With kindness, with integrity, with a sense that every person, every moment mattered. Friends saw her staying up late writing speeches, volunteering, juggling leadership roles, but always reaching, always seeking. She was beloved, admired, a bright star among many stars, guiding rather than showing off. That is who Eve Carson was. A person of promise, of generosity, of dreams too large for her age. And on a night that started much like any other, her path would cross with danger, changing everything. In the late evening of March 4, 2008, Eve's day wound down with routine familiar to anyone chasing academic and social commitments. She studied, she planned, she engaged. She returned to her off-campus home, a house shared with roommates near campus. She locked her doors. She settled in for the night. To many, it seemed like any thesis drafting, coffee-sipping evening. At around 3:30 a.m., she used her computer. Logs later showed her last activity at 3:37 a.m. She was likely preparing for the next day's meetings, emails, or assignments. There was no indication of fear. No suggestion that her world was collapsing. just the quiet hum of progress and obligation. It was in those sleeping hours that danger arrived, unexpected and unseen. Two men, Lawrence Alvin Lovett Jr., aged 17, and Demario James Atwater, aged 21, left their separate lives behind and drove toward Chapel Hill, seeking opportunity of the cruel kind. They intended to rob someone. According to later testimony, they searched for a victim. Eve Carson, returning home or walking toward her car, became visible, a target. They forced her into her own vehicle. A gun pressed to her head. Coercion and terror replaced safety and normalcy. They drove her to ATMs. At one, $700 was withdrawn. At another, attempts failed. Eve Carson was with strangers now. She saw fear in their faces. They saw fear in hers. She was more than what circumstances demanded of her in those hours. She pleaded for mercy, for life. She asked them, according to witness testimony, to pray, to be heard, to be human. Yet the trap was already closing. Then, in a wooded neighborhood about a mile from UNC's campus, the violence escalated. She was shot multiple times, first with a handgun, then a weapon that ended her life. The cruelty was sudden, overwhelming. And then silence. That moment, the transition from normal to nightmare, is the hinge of the story. Up until then, Eve Carson had lived as many do, with hope, with purpose, with the assumption that tomorrow continues. The trigger event, her abduction and forced robbery, her pleas ignored, and the decision by her captors to silence her life. On March 5th, around dawn, her body was found. But in the hours between, a community unaware would begin to stir, to fret, to search. When morning stretched into daylight, Eve Carson did not show up for classes. Her roommates raised concern. She had been reliable. They tried her cell phone, texted. No answer. No sign that she was okay. By midday, alarm spread to her friends, her professors. Campus emails, discussions across the university. Something was wrong. Her absence was unlike her. She was not the kind to simply vanish from routine. As evening approached, her parents and local authorities were notified. A missing person case followed. Officers walked her route, checked surveillance near her dorm and home, looked for clues. Then came shocking confirmation. Just after 5 a.m. on March 5, 2008, police responded to gunfire in a wooded area off Hillcrest Road, a quiet street near UNC. A witness had heard shots, a scream. They found her body. Her roommates later identified her. Eve was dead. Physical evidence confirmed what people feared. She had been shot 5 times, 4 with a handgun in the shoulder, arm, buttock, and cheek. The 5th, fatal, delivered with a shotgun to her temple. Traces in her lungs showed she was alive after the handgun shots. She had tried to protect herself. 1 bullet passed through her hand. Detectives discovered that after being forced into her vehicle, she had been made to withdraw money from ATMs. Surveillance cameras captured transactions at University Mall around 3:55 a.m. and attempts elsewhere. Her car, her belongings, movements, all became evidence. They found her cell phone activity, DNA on the vehicle door, bullets matching weapons. Witnesses came forward. The puzzle pieces began to gather around a dark center. But the discovery of her body was only the beginning. For Eve's family, for her community, the grief was immediate and raw. For investigators, it was the spark that ignited a long and complex quest for justice. The investigation into Eve Carson's murder unfolded slowly, methodically, and under intense public pressure. Law enforcement agencies, local and federal, joined hands. Detectives turned over every stone. Surveillance footage, cell phone records, forensic evidence, witness statements. One of the early and crucial leads came from ATM surveillance footage. Authorities confirmed that around 3:55 a.m., $700 was withdrawn from Eve's bank account at an ATM in Chapel Hill. Attempts at other ATMs also appeared on tape. These transactions provided timestamps, choreography to the night's terror. Simultaneously, cell tower data placed Lawrence Lovett Jr.'s phone near Eve's home in Chapel Hill at about the same time. This established proximity. It drew Lovett into the timeline. Forensics played a defining role. DNA was found inside Eve's SUV, matching Lovett. Experts testified. The dominant profile on the driver's side interior panel was his. Bullets retrieved from Eve's body matched weapons found in connection with the suspects. A .25 caliber handgun for the 4 shots. A 12-gauge shotgun for the final, deadly shot. WRAL. Witnesses were also vital. Jason McNeil, a childhood friend of Lovett, testified later that Lovett had admitted to being present. McNeil said Eve Carson had pleaded in the back seat, asked them to pray, that she recognized the horror in their acts and still sought something like mercy. Prosecutors reconstructed how Atwater and Lovett abducted Eve from her home, forced her into the vehicle, made her withdraw money, then drove to a secluded area to kill her, because they believed she had seen their faces and there was no turning back from being recognized. In court, forensic evidence about bullet trajectories, gunshot residue, and autopsy results showed Eve was conscious through many of the shots. The fatal shotgun blast came last, through her temple, ending any hope. Her pleas, her hand raised, her dignity in the face of terrible fear. All these details emerged. Investigators also faced challenges. Questionable alibis, defense arguments about witness credibility, and procedural scrutiny over the collection of evidence. Some witnesses had criminal records. Some claimed bias. Defense attorneys sought to raise doubt at every junction. Yet the evidence, from physical traces to surveillance data to cell phone records, held together. It was in the layering of small but undeniable truths. Her computer last used at 3:37 a.m., transactions recorded at ATMs, the DNA match, the firearms, the confession to McNeil, that the case began to feel less chaotic and more inevitable. From the investigation phase, 2 names loomed largest: Demario James Atwater and Lawrence Alvin Lovett Jr. Atwater, aged 21 at the time, already had a criminal history that made him known to law enforcement. Lovett, only 17, was a minor, but his involvement would prove central. Prosecutors would later allege that Lovett initiated the plan, that both men shared responsibility, but that Lovett executed the 4 initial handgun shots while Atwater delivered the final, fatal shotgun blast. McNeil, formerly a friend and acquaintance of Lovett, became a crucial witness. He testified that Lovett had told him about the crime not long after it happened, how they had kidnapped a student from Chapel Hill, how she begged them to pray, how the decision to kill was driven in part by her seeing their faces. McNeil's testimony was controversial due to his own legal troubles, yet many of his details were corroborated by physical evidence. The surveillance photos, the ATM records, forensics linking bullets, DNA in the SUV. The breakthrough in the case came when, in the trial of Lovett, the forensic analysts presented DNA evidence inside the driver's side door of Eve's Highlander. That evidence showed a match to Lovett. Also, ballistic experts connected spent casings found in nearby woods with a handgun used in the 4 shots. The shotgun, likewise, matched to shell casings associated with Atwater. Another key point was the phone records for Lovett. Around the time of Eve's disappearance, his phone pinged a cell tower roughly 0.3 miles from her home. CCTV and ATM camera footage then showed transactions using Eve's bank card, from Chapel Hill, then attempts elsewhere, all tracing back to the suspects. Every piece built into a grid of guilt. Atwater's path diverged in the legal process. He eventually pleaded guilty to both state and federal charges, including kidnapping, carjacking, weapons possession, and murder, avoiding the possibility of the death penalty via plea agreements. Lovett, being a minor at the time, could not receive the death penalty. His trial began in December 2011. Over the course, the prosecution laid out their case. Eyewitness reports, DNA, ballistic evidence, cell phone data, ATM videos. The defense sought to introduce doubt, citing witness credibility issues and possible biases. But the weight of the forensic and testimonial evidence tipped the scale. On December 20, 2011, the jury convicted Lovett of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was heavy with grief, resolve, and scrutiny. For Eve's family, her parents, her roommates, her friends, it was their first public moment of reckoning. They sat quietly, dignified, listening to testimony that painted Eve not as a victim, but as a person full of hope, love, and life. During Atwater's plea in 2010, he publicly said he was sorry, looked at her parents, and accepted responsibility for certain charges. He pleaded guilty to federal carjacking, kidnapping resulting in death, firearms offenses, along with state charges including first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison plus additional years. For Lovett, the trial was longer, more contested. His youth was central to the defense. Witnesses testified. Forensic experts presented DNA, ballistics, and surveillance. On December 20, 2011, the jury convicted him. He, too, received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As he was a minor, the death penalty was not on the table. The verdict was met with tears, silence, some relief. Eve's parents released statements honoring her life, her dedication, her kindness, her academic and social accomplishments. The courtroom understood. No sentence could restore a life too soon ended, but justice would at least hold someone accountable. In the years since Eve's death, her legacy has grown in measured, meaningful ways. The University of North Carolina established the Eve Marie Carson Memorial Junior Year Merit Scholarship to honor students who show academic achievement, leadership, and service. Her friends, classmates, and community continue to remember her not just as the victim of a crime, but as someone who inspired others. Her speeches, her service, her caring presence, these remain alive in the people who knew her. Her case also became a cautionary mirror. Conversations about campus safety, violence against women, the role of adequate street lighting, surveillance, and bystander responsibility intensified. The pain of what happened prompted policy reviews and reforms in institutional safety protocols. Eve Carson's life, though cut short, left an imprint. Not merely a tragedy, her story became a rallying point. For justice, for compassion, for hope that even in darkness something enduring can be born. Her life was a burst of possibility. Her loss was a fracture no justice could fully heal. But remembering Eve Carson, who she was, what she stood for, matters deeply. If you found this case compelling, if it stirred questions of justice, compassion, or safety, please like this video, share it, and subscribe for more true crime stories told with respect and depth. Every share keeps Eve's memory alive. Every view honors her life. If you're moved, consider supporting scholarship funds like the ones in her name, or donating to campus safety organizations. Speak out in your community, because change often begins with one voice, one action. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, stay vigilant.